This story is about fathers. And I'd like to give just a little bit of an introduction before I actually go into this story. Some fathers are good. Good-looking, good-natured, good-tempered. Some fathers are always attentive, always available, always able. And some fathers are not. Some fathers are absent. Some fathers are abusive. Some fathers are every shade of addict. Alcohol addict, drug addict, gambling addict. Some fathers are always arguing, always screaming, always slamming doors. And some fathers disappear on cold winter mornings while their children are at school. What Sherman Alexie has taught me about humor. Some people are born with a sense of humor, and they are blessed. Others develop a sense of humor, and they are suspicious. My father developed a sense of humor. It was one of two things that he brought back from prison, the other thing being a pair of white Nike basketball shoes. Maybe he wanted to show us the good aspects of prison, so as not to scare us. Like my father, I am also learned when it comes to humor. My teacher, whom I've never met, is Sherman Alexie, a poet, filmmaker, and writer from the Spokane Indian Reservation. Let me sample his work for you. I am giving a reading at a bookstore in Spokane, Washington. There is a large crowd. I read a story about an Indian father who leaves his family for good. He moves to a city 1,000 miles away. Then he dies. It is a sad story. When I finish, a woman in the front row breaks into tears. "What's wrong?" I ask her. "I'm so sorry about your father," she says. "Thank you," I say. "But that's my father, sitting right next to you." My father left for 5 years. He was sent to a federal prison 300 miles away. He didn't die, so this isn't a sad story. In the beginning, I didn't understand my father's crime, why he was sent away. So I searched through letters that came in the mail, pilfered through paperwork in my parents' bedroom, and tried to find that one word that might appease my 12-year-old mind. Perhaps robbery, or murder, or conspiracy. In the end, I found the answer, not on a sheet of paper, but by word of mouth. "It was bankruptcy fraud," said a boy at church. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because my mother prosecuted your father," he said. "Thank you," I said, and we went separate ways. But thank you? I couldn't believe that I said thank you to that boy. What did that mean? Thank you that my father is in prison? Thank you that you told me why my father is in prison? Thank you that you told me that your mother prosecuted my father and put him in prison? It wasn't funny, but I laughed, because I was relieved that my father had not robbed anyone in particular, had not pointed a gun at anyone, had not killed anyone. It would have been so uncharacteristic of him. My father lost both of his parents in the Vietnam War, his father to illness and his mother to a village raid. As a result, he was one of those people who were orphaned by the war, who changed identities to evade conscription, who, after the war ended, decided to leave Vietnam. He was one of those people who became gambling addicts to try to make up for unimaginable losses. As it is, my father has always been a little bit suspicious, has always been a fraud. But he hasn't always had a sense of humor. That came after prison. After prison, when my father restored his presence in the house, coffee in the morning, a trail of cigarette smoke flowing from the back patio to the front porch, his arguments with my mother also returned. Something about Vietnam, something about money, something about an affair. They usually fought in the mornings, as if they woke up and hated everything about each other. An object slamming into the ground and echoing off the tiles woke me up one morning. I looked around to see if my sisters had heard the noise, but they were fast asleep or else pretending to be asleep. my siblings, the 8 of us that remained after the older 7 left for college, didn't have a protocol for mornings when our parents fought. Some slept through, some heard the whole thing, but most, like me, woke up at the very end. After the heavy object hit the ground, my mother started screaming and threatened to leave the house. Said she could drop everything if she wanted to and walked out. It turned out my sisters were all awake because the moment the front door slammed shut, we all scrambled toward the window, peeked through the blinds, and saw our mother standing on the driveway, naked. What on earth had they been fighting about, I thought. At least put your clothes on, I wanted to tell her. People know us. Yes, out in the country, on vast farmland that makes up this smallest corner of Pensacola, there's a chance that a passerby might stop and see my mother and think it very odd, odder than a chicken blocking the road or a cow crossing the street. I don't know who was more naked in that moment, our mother or me. Every truth about my life felt revealed in that moment, as if my life was a culmination of my parents' arguments, of my father's imprisonment. My sisters and I returned to the bed, and together we laughed, because it was ridiculous, because it was embarrassing, because it was awful, the worst thing to put your kid through. We laughed until there was nothing more to laugh about. In response to Sherman Alexie's writing, someone once wrote, "All Alexie was funny," as if delivering a punchline was somehow easy. But I can assure you that Alexie's writing works beyond funny, that his comedy is also a way of expressing pain or illuminating a struggle. Let me sample his writing again. After the argument that I had lost but pretended to win, I stormed out of the HUD house, jumped into the car, and prepared to drive off in victory, which was also known as defeat. But I realized that I hadn't grabbed my keys. At that kind of moment, a person begins to realize how he can be fooled by his own games. And at that kind of moment, a person begins to formulate a new game to compensate for the failure of the first. "Honey, I'm home!" I yelled as I walked back into the house. "Didn't you miss me? I've been gone so long, and it's good to be back home, where I belong." My mother didn't return, and for a month, my father and I tried to find her. We went to the Buddhist temple, to the houses of old friends, to the nail shop where she'd wanted to work, and together, we experienced defeat. Doors slammed in our faces, backs turned, and phone lines went dead. I'd lost my father once, and now I had lost my mother. During the night, my father took me downtown to the billiard room where he played poker with my money since he was still unemployed. There was an older man who wore a green fishing hat. Every night, the man with the green fishing hat played a little better than my father. Every night, the man with the green fishing hat took a little more of my father's poker chips. I sat there nervously and resisted the urge to grab the chips back. Hour after hour, I counted my losses. And then one night, after they had worn down the last deck of cards, after my father had lost every single chip, after he smoked his last cigarette, the man with the green fishing hat gathered the chips in a pile and cashed them in. He shoved the money, my money, in his wallet, in his pockets, in the space between his head and his hat, in his palms. And as he walked out, I turned to my father and said, "You gave all of my money to that man." And shamelessly, without understanding the time and effort I put in to earn that money, without acknowledging the magnitude of my loss, my father said, "That man is your mother's boyfriend." I had never wanted to hit my father so hard for knowing that and making me sit there every single night, for losing my money, for losing my mother. I understood then what it felt like to be dealt a shitty hand, what it felt like to lose all the time. I wanted to run after the man and beg for my money back, to beg for my mother back. But instead, I sat right next to my father and we laughed. Because losing my money was as painful as losing my mother. Because losing my mother was as painful as losing my father. Because laughing was an antiseptic for all the losses we'd incurred. because I would have rather cried. Because, according to Sherman Alexie, laughter and tears are pretty much the same thing. Thank you.